Hi guys, my name is Dr. Rutendo Windingwi, and I'm excited to have a session with you today where you personally hear from me based on my experience, the research I've done with regards to doing business in Africa. I'm also an author of two books, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, which focuses on how to navigate the African landscape, as well as the other book called Reflections of a Son of the Soil, which is a collection of 55 African proverbs. I've had a number of podcast series with great subject matter experts on various topics, from technology to talking about business enterprises, investment on the African continent. The list is quite endless, but it was deep discussions drawing from their own expertise, galvanizing with my own experiences and having quite a robust discussion. With this specific session, I'm bringing from my own experience, which I've highlighted, and you can be seen in the two books that I've written on, what is required for you to have a successful, innovative business strategy in Africa. And this learning that I'm going to share with you is drawn from that famous fight between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali in 1974 in the wonderful city of Kinshasa in Zaire, present-day DRC. And the fight was well known as Rumble in the Jungle. But the learnings from there I framed into a model called Tito to the power of RD, which draws about four key nuggets, which stand for: the T stands for understanding the territory, the I is for innovation, the TO together as a duo of threats and opportunities, and RD, and I actually usually say to the power of RD because the RD is the wrapper, and that stands for relentless drive and determination. So those four key components I will unpack in the next few minutes to give you insight as a tool and a framework inspired by a wonderful story that also comes from the African continent on how you as a business and your leadership can be successful on the African continent. So when you look at Africa, historically, it's always been a place of opportunity. And in line with that, a lot of businesses have been successful on the African continent, whether they're multinationals coming in to the African continent or African multinationals expanding to the rest of Africa. And what I always say is that it's quite easy to look at Africa from a homogeneous perspective in terms of just saying as one piece of land with one group of people. How big is the GDP? 3.1 trillion. What is the expected year-on-year growth for the next 5 years, 10 years? I think the World Bank says 4.5%. Talking to with regards to the key sectors driving growth, you can look at the fintech industry, look at infrastructure, all of those. And when you look at it from that perspective, it looks really quite simple. But for people who've worked and lived in Africa, who've had their scars, and I'm talking from experience, I've been on the continent in terms of doing business over the last 20 years. I've worked in over 20 different countries. So I've kind of learned the hard way with regards to mistakes and doing things the right way. I've worked for leading multinationals. One of them was actually listed on the London Stock Exchange, a big technology company, and drove their growth strategy into the rest of Africa. I've worked for a leading advisory, probably one of the biggest multinational advisory firms, Deloitte. And I think I've learned over the years in terms of the right things to do and the not so right things to do. And one of the frameworks that I've adopted, which have given me a good structure, not to only work for myself in terms of giving me guidance, but also in terms of consulting and giving advice to business and government leaders in terms of doing business in Africa, is I've given it the acronym TITO to the power of RD, or TITO RD. And I'll unpack that in a bit more detail. And this has actually come out of one of my books, which I published, called Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, which I used the exciting story between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali of their phenomenal boxing match in 1974, titled Rumble in the Jungle. And there were some key lessons from there that I've also injected or infused into this framework to give essence. And that's what I'll be unpacking in the next few minutes with regards to giving any business or leadership that wants to be successful in the African market how to leverage off that. So starting off with the team in terms of understanding the territory, and I'll start off with the story of Rumble in the Jungle. It was Muhammad Ali, George Foreman. As we know, Muhammad Ali won the fight after 9 rounds. And one of the key things for him to win the fight, even though he was the underdog, was he understood the territory. He connected with the people of Zaire, present-day DRC, and he got to know them. He won their hearts. And on the day of the fight, even as an underdog, before the fight began, he had won the crowd over. And what that talks to is one of the key requirements for you to be successful in the African market, and this is backed by leading research, thought leadership, and part of that research I partook when I did my PhD in international business strategy with a global university that's quite established in Africa, is that you have to understand the territory. And what does territory talk to? It talks to a number of things. It talks to the diverse political environment. You've got 54 countries. You've actually got 55 because the Western Sahara is realized by the African Union as a state. But that's 54 people groups. Each of those countries have got different dynamics, different leadership styles, different levels of history, not just related to colonial history that's aligned to them being Portuguese, English, or French related, or none of the above. So that in itself, from a people group cultural perspective, has major implications. So that's the first thing. Economically, each country of those 54, the dynamics are totally different from each other. I'll give you an example. I gave you the GDP of Africa is 3.1 trillion, but there are 4 countries on the African continent that contribute to 40% of Africa's GDP. And those 4 are namely Algeria, Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria. So what does that mean? That means that when you look at Africa's GDP for 54 countries, 40 to 45% is locked up in 4 countries, which creates an influential block, but at the same time, it's a reality check in terms of the level of diversity that is there. Then there's the social aspect, the people. You've got black, white, Chinese, you've got mixed races that are there. I think one of the leading strategies or thought leaders when it came to strategy, and you look at American authors, they always mention that culture would eat strategy for breakfast anytime. And when you've got so much diversity in culture, you can imagine how big the breakfast table is with opportunities and diversity from an Africa perspective. And then you can talk to the legal and to the social aspects. But at the end of the day, when you look at the territory of Africa, it's absolutely critical to appreciate this diversity and not see it as a challenge, but as a reality that one has to navigate. I give the example of one of the best relishes that you can find on the African continent is a mixed stew, which is a combination of meat boiled with tomatoes, with onions, and with other condiments. And at the end of the day, the meal that you get out of it is absolutely mouth-watering. But the beauty of it is that it's the blend that creates the differential, and not the lack of the combination of condiments coming together. That gives you an indication in terms of territory. Territory, absolutely critical, just in terms of understanding the framework, in terms of what's happening on the ground. And even more so, a major shift in terms of mindset, not just from an Africa perspective, but from a global perspective, is the role that the digital transformation landscape has also taken a leapfrog growth on the African continent. I mean, Africa probably has penetration levels from a digital perspective of plus or minus 82%, which is remarkably high for any continent in the world. I think the average in the world is probably at least 50%. So what does this talk to? It talks to, when you look at the digital landscape, but bear in mind the borders of the digital landscape are not limited to geographical borders. So it opens up a whole level of conversation when you're looking at opportunity on the African continent, how to navigate around it. And at the end of the day, it's opportunity, but also reality in terms of if the digital landscape is that vast and that expansive, it does mean that it's not only open to us as the African business people, but also to global players. And I'll talk a bit more about that going into the next nugget. So I've given you background with regards to the territory and the importance of that. So that's the T, understanding that framework and appreciating the complexity. And whether you apply your SWOT analysis, your PESTEL analysis, you can name whatever framework you need. At the end of the day, understanding your territory is a key component. The second component is innovation. And innovation itself, why is this role absolutely critical? Well, let's go back to the fight, because I always say when I do my leadership development classes and I've got the delegates who are before me, I always say that a framework helps you border or bring understanding, or gives you a tool in terms of implementing your strategy, which is the T2RD framework. But a story helps you remember and inspires you. And that's why I use a combination of the two. So going back to the fight with Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, innovation, Muhammad Ali used a technique called rope-a-dope for that fight. And for those that are not familiar in boxing, as you can see, I'm not that well built up as I was 20 years ago. But, rope-a-dope is a technique a boxer uses when he absorbs the punches of his opponent to wear him off. And he does this by leaning on the ropes. And that technique became popular specifically because of that fight and Muhammad Ali. So innovation really talks in summary to thinking out of the box and adapting your strategy for a specific challenge that you want to meet.